The floor was cold, harder than she expected, digging into her knees through thin fabric and pain. Every breath scraped through Elena Marino's throat like gravel, sharp with panic and dust. She didn't dare move, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't know what would happen if she did. Her arms trembled as she crouched between wooden crates, heart racing so loud it drowned out thought. Then she heard them, the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. 5 of them. At least 5 men, boots slamming against concrete, cutting through the empty echo of the dockside warehouse. Each step thundered louder, closer, until they stopped just beyond the end of her row. She squeezed her eyes shut. Don't see me. Just keep walking. But silence followed. Silence thick as molasses. Until she felt it, a shift in air. The prickle of a shadow overhead. The creak of someone crouching. Elena forced her eyes open, just barely. Her vision was hazy, but she could see him. Not just any man. The man. Broad shoulders beneath a white tank, tattoos winding down muscled arms, face carved from stone. His hair was slicked back, his expression unreadable. Behind him stood a wall of tailored suits, arms crossed, watching her like a stray dog that had wandered too close to fire. This had to be the end. She braced herself for the barked orders. The dragging. The punishment. But instead, he extended a hand, not to strike, but to offer. His voice came low, gravel and warmth. A whisper wrapped in thunder. Who hurt you? For words. That was all it took to make her eyes sting. Not, who are you? Not, what are you doing here? But, who hurt you? The question pierced deeper than any blade. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even curiosity. It was something else, a promise, maybe. One she hadn't let herself believe in for years. Her lips trembled. Her body wanted to fold in on itself. But she stayed upright. He waited, crouched like he had all the time in the world. Don Lorenzo Ricci, Naples' most dangerous man. And he wasn't looking at her with disgust. He was looking at her like she mattered. And just like that, something in Elena Marino, a long buried, long bruised, breathed. She didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. Light burned through her eyelids before the pain did. Elena blinked slowly, vision swimming in a haze of sterile whites and soft shadows. The ceiling above her wasn't industrial steel. It was smooth, ornate, like something out of a luxury hotel. Somewhere nearby, machines beeped gently, their rhythm calm and mechanical, a far cry from the chaos she remembered. Her throat was dry, lips cracked, body aching in places she couldn't name. She tried to shift and immediately regretted it. A sharp pain shot down her left leg, and a heavy bandage wrapped tight across her ribs pressed against every breath. She gasped, her hand flailing weakly until fingers brushed cool linen. There was no blood, no grime. Just sheets, clean, soft, tucked around her like a cocoon. She wasn't in the warehouse anymore. That fact alone made her heart race. Her last clear memory was that man, Lorenzo Ricci, crouching beside her, looking at her like she was more than a problem to be removed. She remembered his hand, open, not forcing, but offering. And then, nothing. A door hissed open with the sound of wealth, a slow, smooth swing that spoke of oil, not rust. Soft footsteps approached, not boots, not harsh. Leather. Controlled. Then a voice. You're awake. Her breath caught. He was there. The same man, but now dressed differently, a black button-up, sleeves rolled, watch glinting. His eyes hadn't changed. Neither had the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with disgust, but with the sharp, unreadable intensity of someone who noticed everything. You're in a clinic under my estate, he said, tone even, almost gentle. You were dehydrated, malnourished, concussed. And your leg. His voice faltered just enough to make her glance at him. They left you to die. Elena swallowed, forcing her gaze away. She didn't want to remember. Didn't want to see flashes of fists, the sound of laughter as her body broke. But her mind didn't care. It brought it back in jagged cuts, the offer she refused, the price she paid. They tried to make me, her voice cracked and vanished. She flinched, realizing her throat couldn't bear the words. Her hand moved instinctively to her neck. The four-line tugged slightly as her fingers trembled. Lorenzo didn't speak right away. He moved to a chair near her bed, sitting down slowly. Not looming. Not pacing. Just watching. "I don't need to know everything right now," he said at last. "Only what you want me to know." His words came with the weight of someone used to silence, not sentiment. Her eyes welled before she could stop them. Not from pain, though that was plenty, but from confusion. From safety that felt too much like a trick. Why would a man like him, rich, dangerous, feared, waste his time on someone like her? She turned her head away, ashamed. Her body was swollen, stitched, covered in bruises. Her arm alone looked like it belonged to someone twice her size, bloated, bruised, useless. Her stomach knotted beneath the thin blanket. She felt disgusting. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped. "I shouldn't be here." "You are," he said. "That's all that matters." A nurse entered then, a woman in her 50s with calm hands and a no-nonsense walk. She moved efficiently, checking monitors, adjusting a line, nodding once to Lorenzo without a word. Elena watched her warily, but there was no coldness, no dismissal in the woman's face. "Just focus. She's stable," the nurse said. "Leg will take time. Ribs worse. Psych eval recommended when she's stronger." Lorenzo gave a nod, the kind that ended meetings in boardrooms or blood feuds in back alleys. "Treat her like family," he said without looking away from Elena. "Because from this day forward, she is." The words hung in the air like thunder without the storm. Elena stared at him, breath frozen. Family? She didn't even know what that meant anymore. Or if it had ever meant anything to begin with. The nurse didn't question it. She simply made a note, then left as quietly as she'd come. Elena wanted to scream. Or laugh. Or cry. But she did none of those things. Instead, she lay there, trembling. That night, the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. The machines kept their rhythm. A tray of food appeared, broth, bread, water, but her hands were too weak. A second nurse offered to help her sit, but Elena shook her head. She didn't want to be touched. She waited for Lorenzo to return, but he didn't. Not for hours. Not until after midnight, when the room was quiet and her pain had dulled to a slow, familiar hum. Then the door opened. He stepped in alone this time. She didn't pretend to be asleep. She didn't have the energy. He stood at the foot of her bed, arms folded, then walked slowly to the chair again. Silence hung between them like a second blanket. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled something out. A small whiteboard. A marker. He set it on the tray beside her without a word. She stared at it. Her hand moved. Shaky. Clumsy. But she picked it up. Wrote with jagged strokes. Then flipped the board toward him. "Why are you doing this?" He read it. Sat back. And smiled. Just barely. "Because someone left you behind," he said. "And I don't leave people behind." Elena's breath caught in her chest. Not from fear. Not this time. From something heavier. Something warmer. Something dangerous. Hope. Elena's world narrowed to quiet things. The hiss of 4 tubes. The rustle of clean sheets. The distant sound of boots outside her door, always soft, never rushed. She came to know the rhythm of this silence, the strange safety in it. Her body hated her. Every inch was stiff, swollen, stitched. Pain sat under her skin like a second heartbeat. But she didn't cry. Not now. Her voice hadn't returned, not fully. But her hands, while slow, could still write. And her eyes, they were wide open now, watching everything. Every nurse. Every guard posted outside. Every time Lorenzo stepped into the room and didn't speak, just looked. He came every evening. Sometimes he sat. Sometimes he just stood in the corner like he was guarding something precious. But always he was there. Not once had he asked her for answers. Not once had he tried to make her feel grateful. One night, the rain tapped against the window like fingertips. Lorenzo entered, shoulders wet, hair darkened from the storm. He didn't speak at first, just pulled the chair closer. Elena had been propped up with pillows, her leg elevated, the 4 still running. She blinked at him. "I had a sister," he said, voice quieter than usual. Sophia. The name caught on something in his throat. She was like you. Stronger than anyone knew. Elena listened, unmoving. She got mixed up with men who used charm like weapons, he continued. They groomed her, made her believe she mattered, then tossed her aside like garbage when she no longer served a purpose. His jaw tightened. She came home in pieces. There was no emotion on his face, only stillness. But Elena could feel it. Something brittle behind the bone. His pain wasn't loud. It was quiet and dangerous, like a knife left on a table. She was 16, he said. And I was 17, too proud, too caught up in my own climb to see what was happening. My mother blamed me. She wasn't wrong. He looked down at his hands. She made me swear no one under my protection would ever end up like Sophia. Elena's chest ached in a new way, not from injury, but from the clarity of it. This wasn't pity. This wasn't obligation. This was reparation written in grief. A code carved into his soul by guilt and blood. I see her in you, Lorenzo said without flinching. Not because of what you've suffered, but because you survived it. He leaned back slightly. You stayed alive. That's strength I won't ignore. The room felt heavier now, filled with something unspoken. Elena gripped her marker and slowly wrote. Her fingers still trembled. But her message was steady. I'm sorry for your sister. He read it. Nodded once. I made a mistake, he said, but I'm not making it again. The next day, therapy began. 2 nurses came in with a young physical therapist named Giada, all tight buns, soft eyes, and steel beneath her tone. She didn't treat Elena like glass. She treated her like someone with fight still in her. Elena hated her and admired her in equal measure. The first time she sat upright was agony. Her broken leg was strapped, her ribs bound, but she clenched her jaw and let them move her. Sweat poured down her face. Her arms shook. But she didn't quit. Giada whispered, that's it. That's the fire I was told about. Elena's lips curved, barely, the closest thing to a smile she'd managed in weeks. Her body was still broken, but her soul, it flickered. And that was something. Later that week, she tried speaking again. The sound that came out was barely more than a croak, but it was a beginning. Her throat burned. Her words were slow. But Lorenzo was there when it happened. He didn't react, not outwardly. Just leaned forward slightly and said, again. So she did. One word. Then another. Then a painful, whispered string. I want to try. Each night, Lorenzo visited. And each night, she gave him more. Not secrets. Not confessions. Just herself, little by little. The kitchen staff delivered a tray one afternoon, roasted chicken, greens, soft bread, broth. Elena stared at it. Her hands shook. Her stomach clenched. She hadn't eaten in front of anyone in years. Not without judgment. Not without someone watching her plate like a prison sentence. The thought of Lorenzo seeing her chew made bile rise in her throat. He noticed, of course. He didn't speak. He simply rose, walked around the bed, and knelt beside her. May I? He asked. She didn't answer. But she didn't say no. He took the spoon, scooped the broth, and raised it with the same care he might offer a wine glass at a funeral. No spectacle. No condescension. Just quiet respect. Elena opened her mouth. Swallowed. And breathed. That one spoonful was heavier than any meal. She looked at him, at the man the world feared. And she saw none of it. Only the brother who had once failed a sister. Only the man who had built an empire and still carried his dead with him. Lorenzo wiped her mouth gently with a napkin. No words. No praise. Just presence. That night, she whispered, thank you. Her voice cracked halfway through. But he heard it. You don't owe me that, he replied. But you're welcome. The next morning, she stood for the first time barely, using a walker, her body screaming with every motion. Giada cried. Elena didn't. Not until Lorenzo entered and saw her standing. Their eyes met. No words needed. Later, after she'd been settled back into bed, Giada left, and Lorenzo remained behind. He stood by the window, watching the rain start up again, Naples in storm season. Elena was half asleep, her breath shallow, the air around her thick with ache and quiet triumph. Then the knock came. It was low. Intentional. Lorenzo didn't speak. He walked to the door and opened it just enough for a man in a gray suit to lean in. The words were soft, but Elena heard them anyway. The men who did this? We found them. If you were in Elena's place, would you trust someone like Lorenzo, someone powerful, dangerous, but unexpectedly kind? Or would fear still win? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe. The rain had not let up. It fell in thick sheets, washing the alleys of Naples clean of sins no one ever confessed. In the darkness near the port, 5 black vehicles lined up in silence, their engines barely audible over the storm. Lorenzo stood at the front, dressed in all black, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a single gold ring gleaming on his right hand. The men around him waited, silent, alert, loyal. He walked with the kind of purpose that made the others step aside. His eyes were colder than the rain, his jaw locked in a quiet, seething stillness. This wasn't rage. It was precision. Vengeance measured in gasoline and blood. The building ahead, an abandoned seafood warehouse now used by the rival crew, loomed like a decaying carcass. Lorenzo had known they were creeping into his territory. He hadn't known they were monsters. Not until they broke a woman in his city and left her to rot in his dockside property. That made it personal. He raised a hand. His men moved. Gasoline containers were pulled from trunks, splashed across walls, crates, doors. No one spoke. There was no need. Inside, 4 of the men responsible were already on their knees. Tied. Muzzled. Eyes wide. The smell of fear mixed with rain and oil. Lorenzo entered slowly, dragging the toe of his boot across the wet concrete. "You touched what I protect," he said. "And then you left her for dead." He crouched in front of the youngest of them, barely 30, blood already leaking from a busted lip. "You thought there would be no consequence. You thought wrong." He stood, nodded once. "Make it quick." 3 gunshots cracked through the storm like thunder, one after another. Final. Clinical. Echoes vanished into the downpour. One man was left alive, the eldest. Scarred. Silent. Sobbing. Lorenzo walked up to him. "You'll carry the message," he said. "You'll walk with the weight of her screams in your ears. You'll tell them, Don Ricci burns the world for what's his." He leaned in close. "And she is." Outside, the fire caught fast. Flames raced through crates and oil-stained wood. The blaze swallowed the building in minutes. Smoke curled into the sky like a soul escaping a body. Lorenzo watched until the roof collapsed. Back at the estate, Elena didn't know what time it was when she woke. But the air felt different. Heavier. The kind of silence that follows a storm. She sat up slowly, her leg aching beneath the brace, her hands shaky as she reached for the water on her bedside table. Giada entered with her usual calm smile. "You're early," she said. "That's a good sign." She helped Elena adjust the cushions behind her. "Let's test your leg today. See what it's ready to give back." They worked slowly. Elena clenched her teeth as the pain flared. But there was a twitch, a small movement in her left foot. Giada's eyes widened, and she grinned. "There she is," she whispered. "There's the fighter." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, uninvited and warm. She hadn't expected progress. Not yet. But her body had heard something, a shift, a permission. It was as if the part of her that had shut down had decided to try again. Later that afternoon, Lorenzo stepped into her room, still in black, smelling faintly of smoke and rain. He looked tired, but composed. She knew something had happened. She didn't need to ask. She could see it in the way his shoulders carried weight and power all at once. She watched him carefully. Waited for words. None came at first. He simply sat, hands folded, gaze fixed on hers. And then he said, "You're safe now." It was a simple statement, but it cracked something inside her. She looked away, breath hitching. "They're gone," she whispered, voice steadier than it had been days ago. Lorenzo nodded once. "You don't have to fear them again," he said. "You don't have to look over your shoulder." She swallowed. Her throat felt tighter. "What did you do?" she asked softly. He didn't lie. "I made a promise," he said. "To you. And to a ghost I still carry." He reached for the small table beside her and picked up her whiteboard. "You never asked for this war. But I did." She looked at him then, truly looked. He was a man made of edges, sharp, controlled, dangerous. And yet, in this room, with her, he was something else. Something steadier. Something sacred. "Do I scare you, Dawn?" she asked, voice so soft it almost disappeared. He didn't smile. Didn't blink. He leaned forward just enough for her to see the truth in his eyes. "No," he said. "You calm me." The dining room stretched long and wide, lit by golden sconces and a chandelier that glittered like it belonged in another century. Polished wood gleamed beneath crystal glassware, and everything smelled of saffron, garlic, and money. Elena stood at the threshold, breath shallow, heart a hammer in her ribs. She wore a long dark dress that skimmed the floor. Giada had helped her pick it out, insisting it flattered her shape, that it made her look like a queen. But Elena didn't feel like a queen. She felt like an imposter. The voices of men, low, confident, powerful, echoed down the table. Lorenzo was already seated at the head, sipping from a short glass of something amber and expensive. His eyes found hers immediately. He rose without fanfare, the room quieting as if by instinct. "Elena," he said, with a softness meant only for her. He walked toward her slowly, offering his arm like they were about to enter a ballroom, not a dinner built on blood and alliances. She hesitated, just for a breath. Then she looped her arm through his. The silence didn't bother her as much as the eyes. Some were curious. Some cold. One pair, belonging to a man with 2 white teeth and an overstyled suit, lingered too long. Lorenzo led her to the seat beside his. Not at the far end. Not off to the side. Beside him. The message was clear. She belonged here. Plates clinked, toasts were made, laughter floated like smoke. Elena kept her gaze mostly on her plate, occasionally daring to glance at Lorenzo, who seemed as calm as ever. The food was exquisite, handmade pasta, roasted artichokes, red wine as rich as velvet. Still, her hand trembled every time she picked up her fork. She could feel the weight of being watched not by Lorenzo, but by the others. They didn't speak to her, not directly. But they whispered, murmured, measured her with every glance. And then it happened. "So this is the new Queen of Naples?" The words slithered from the mouth of Salvatore Mancini, a Ricci ally from Palermo, known more for his ego than his tact. "You're a brave man, Don Ricci. Most wouldn't keep someone like her at their table. Not unless she was cooking." The laughter that followed was short, forced, like a match trying to catch in the rain. Elena froze. Heat rose to her face like fire behind her eyes. She couldn't move. She couldn't even breathe. She thought of running. Of folding back into herself. Of disappearing into the floor. All the progress, all the dignity she'd fought for, cracked like glass in her chest. But before she could speak, before she could even blink, Lorenzo stood. The scrape of his chair against the marble floor was louder than Mancini's voice had been. All conversation ceased. Silence fell like a blade. Lorenzo looked at the man like he was deciding whether or not to end him on the spot. "That woman," he said, his voice calm but sharp as steel, "has survived more than you ever could." He stepped forward, unhurried. "She was left for dead in one of my warehouses by dogs you wouldn't dare name, and she fought her way back without asking anyone for mercy." He paused, letting the words land. "Apologize or leave Naples tonight." Mancini's face turned pale beneath his tan. He stammered something half-formed, but the damage was done. Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Power clung to him like a shadow. "Fine," Mancini muttered. "I'll take my leave." "Good," Lorenzo said, with no ceremony at all. Dinner just improved. The door closed behind Mancini, and still no one spoke. Elena stared at her plate, her heart loud in her ears, her hands clenched under the table. She hadn't cried in front of these men. Not yet. But now tears blurred her vision, not from shame, but from something that felt like being seen. After dinner, when the dishes had been cleared and the men had retired to the library, she excused herself with a whisper. Her body moved slowly, careful, her cane clicking softly on the floor as she made her way back to her room. She closed the door and pressed her back against it. And then, finally, she cried. Not small tears. Not polite ones. She wept with her whole body, the kind of release that empties everything. Not because of what Mancini had said, but because of what Lorenzo had done. A knock came, gentle. She wiped her face quickly, standing straighter. "Come in," she called softly. Lorenzo stepped in alone. He didn't speak at first, just walked to her, closing the distance in slow, measured steps. His hand found hers. "They fear me," he said simply. "But you make them look in the mirror." She stared up at him, throat tight. "Why?" "Because you're what they'll never be," he said. "Whole, even when broken." She didn't know what to say. Words didn't feel enough. So she said nothing. The moment stretched between them, soft and warm. Later that night, long after he'd gone, she sat in the quiet, breathing slow and steady. Her cane rested beside the chair, but she didn't reach for it. Her hands pressed against the armrests. Her legs tensed. And then, slowly, shakily, she stood. Not for therapy. Not because someone was watching. She stood for herself. 5 seconds. Then 10. Her knees wobbled, but they held. The pain was there, but so was something else. Strength. She didn't cry this time. She smiled. Have you ever had someone stand up for you when you didn't know how to stand for yourself? How did that moment change you? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The East Wing of the Ricci estate had once been used for guests, dignitaries, allies, men with heavy names and heavier secrets. Now it belonged to Elena. The transformation was slow, intentional, and deeply hers. She filled the once sterile space with softness, velvet throw pillows, watercolor prints, stacks of secondhand novels Giada helped her pick out. Warm lamplight bathed the hallways in amber, and for the first time in years, her room smelled like lavender instead of antiseptic. A quiet ritual began to take root in the mornings. She would open her curtains before breakfast, breathe in the garden air drifting up through the stone arches, and run her fingers along the spines of her books. There was a peace in that repetition, not the absence of pain, but the presence of place. Her world had once been a warehouse floor. Now it was framed art, brushed steel, and cushions that remembered her shape. She hadn't expected the gift. It came one afternoon in a slim leather box, the kind that might have held jewelry or a weapon. Lorenzo didn't announce it. He left it on her writing desk without a word. Elena found it after her therapy session, still flushed from movement, her muscles shaky with exertion. Inside, a vintage sketchbook, the pages blank and slightly yellowed, the cover worn but sturdy. She stared at it for a long time. Her fingers trembled as they traced the spine. She hadn't drawn since she was a teenager, long before the bruises began and the silence swallowed her. She didn't think anyone had remembered. But someone had. And that someone was him. Lorenzo didn't mention it that evening. Instead, over their shared dinner in the smaller dining salon, quieter, more intimate, he spoke of things like weather patterns off the coast, a shipment delay in Marseille, a new chef who didn't quite understand risotto. Elena listened, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled without checking the room first. The next morning, she joined him for breakfast. He was already there, sleeves rolled, tie loose, dark hair still wet from a shower. The table was set with pastries, soft cheeses, fruit, and 2 perfectly brewed cappuccinos. "You're early," he said without looking up, though the curve of his mouth hinted at something like amusement. "You're late," she replied, and it startled them both. She'd said it lightly, almost teasing. He looked up, one brow arched, and then something unexpected happened. He laughed. Not the short, polite sound she'd heard during tense meetings, but a real laugh, low and warm, like gravel smoothed by time. Elena blinked. The sound made her heart thud in a way she didn't know how to explain. From then on, breakfast became a shared thing. Some mornings were quiet, 2 people reading the paper in companionable silence. Other days, they talked. He told her about the vines growing wild on the southern wall. She told him how her mother used to paint flowers on grocery bags because they couldn't afford canvas. She began to laugh more easily. It wasn't always pretty. Sometimes it came with tears or after a memory that scraped against her ribs. But it was real. And when she laughed, Lorenzo would pause whatever he was doing just to look at her, like he was witnessing something holy. One evening, the topic turned to family. They were sitting on the terrace, watching the city lights blink awake in the distance. A warm breeze stirred the rosemary in the planter nearby. Elena was curled in a thick shawl, her knees tucked under her, sketchbook resting beside her untouched. Lorenzo sipped his drink, eyes on the horizon. "Did your father teach you to run an empire?" she asked, voice gentle. His body stilled for a second, a subtle shift, but unmistakable. "My father taught me how to hurt people," he said. "How to make them obey, how to take what you want and call it power." He turned his glass slowly in his hand. "But I learned to be gentle despite him." The words hit her like a whispered thunderclap. She didn't respond at first, not with words. Instead, she reached across the small table and placed her hand over his. Not trembling, not unsure, just there. He didn't pull away. The first time Elena told Lorenzo who she used to be, it was nearly midnight and the rain hadn't stopped for hours. They were in the sitting room just off the library, fire low, lights dim, shadows flickering like memories neither of them had invited. She was curled into the corner of a leather armchair, legs tucked under her, sketchbook resting untouched in her lap. Her voice was quiet, almost apologetic, as if remembering made her complicit. "They used to call me names so often," she began, "that eventually I started answering to them." Lorenzo didn't move, didn't speak. He simply waited, the way only someone truly listening does. She wasn't telling him for pity. She was telling him because if she didn't, she'd stay caged in a past that still scratched at the door. "I wasn't always fat," she said next. "But once I was, it was like people stopped seeing me and started using me." She told him about the boy in high school who dared her to the prom as a joke. About the supervisor at her first office job who called her "big girl" instead of her name. About the friend who asked to borrow clothes but laughed while trying them on, saying, "I just wanted to feel like I was swimming in something." About the dates who always had dares behind their kindness, and the strangers who treated her as if her body was a public failure. Her voice didn't shake until the end. "They didn't just mock me," she said. "They measured me by something I couldn't hide. And when they couldn't control me, they humiliated me." She paused, gaze drifting to the fire. "And I let them." "No," Lorenzo said firmly. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, his voice low but edged in steel. "They did that. Not you." He met her eyes. "That shame belongs to them, Elena. Not you." She looked at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. It was so simple, so clear, like light breaking through stained glass. For a moment, it silenced all the years screaming in her head. He sat back, letting her words breathe in the room. Elena didn't need to be fixed, he knew that. She needed to be heard. And so he listened, not as a man trained to control, but as someone who had once been a boy watching his sister crumble under other people's cruelty. The next day, Giada arrived with something different in hand, a garment bag wrapped in black silk. Lorenzo said little, only that there was an event that night, and Elena would be joining him. "It's not public," he reassured her. "Only allies I trust." But even his reassurance made her stomach twist with nerves. She hadn't been to anything formal in years, certainly not as a guest, and never as a woman on the arm of someone like him. Giada helped her dress, adjusting the flowing fabric around Elena's curves with practiced care. The gown was black, soft, weightless, the kind of fabric that moved when you breathed and glowed when you didn't. Elena stared at herself in the mirror, fingers gripping the armrests of the vanity stool, unsure whether to cry or hide. "You don't look different," Giada whispered with a smile. "You look like someone who finally sees herself." They arrived just after sundown. The estate's second villa, hidden in the hills above the Amalfi coast, had been transformed, candlelight flickering in crystal, jazz murmuring beneath the sounds of laughter and low-stakes deals. Lorenzo walked in first, hand outstretched for hers, suit perfectly tailored, calm as ever. Elena hesitated at the threshold, breath caught between fight and flight. And then she took his hand. He didn't let go once. Not when heads turned. Not when whispers began. Not even when an older man in a navy pinstripe whispered something crude to the woman beside him, eyes lingering too long on Elena's figure. Lorenzo didn't glare. He didn't bark. He simply squeezed Elena's hand and said, "Keep walking, Karamia." They made it through the entrance, into the music, into the press of Naples' richest shadows. People greeted Lorenzo with respect, deference, a tilt of the chin or a brush of the shoulder. He was still their king. But tonight, all of them looked at the woman beside him and saw something they hadn't expected. Confidence. Power. Not in how she walked slowly, still recovering, but in the fact that she showed up at all. She never stopped hearing the whispers. But for the first time, they didn't stick. She'd walked into a room that wasn't built for her and hadn't broken. And the only man who mattered still had her hand in his. They left before midnight. Back at the estate, she slipped off her shoes and laughed, or really laughed, as she leaned against the wall just inside her room. "That was insane," she said between gasps, cheeks flushed. Lorenzo watched her for a long beat, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" she asked softly, the laughter dying into a quiet breath. He stepped closer, loosening his tie, never breaking her gaze. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." She didn't know what to say to that. So instead, she sat down in the armchair beside the fireplace and waited for him to join her. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass, then sat beside her, one leg crossed over the other. The fire crackled gently, filling the room with soft light and slower thoughts. Elena looked at him, truly looked. And for the first time since he'd found her, she asked the question that had lived in her bones. "Why me?" The words floated between them like ash. Lorenzo didn't look away. The question hung between them like smoke, not harsh, but heavy, curling into the quiet. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and let the firelight trace the edges of his face. "I was 10 the first time I saw my mother lie to protect someone," he said softly. Elena stayed silent, giving him the space to begin. "She was a seamstress," he continued. "Worked out of the back of our apartment, fixing suits for men who paid with thick envelopes and heavier glances. One night, a girl came to the door, couldn't have been older than 16. Her face was swollen. Her hands shook. My mother let her in without a word." He paused, the memory sharpening his voice. "She hid that girl in our basement for 3 weeks," he said. "Fed her. Bathed her wounds. Taught her how to sew a straight line." He gave a small, breathless laugh. "And when the men came looking, my mother looked them dead in the eye and said, 'You search my house. I'll call the police and then the priest, and both will side with me.'" Elena's chest tightened as the image settled in her mind. "She never taught me how to shoot," he said, almost amused. "But she taught me what strength looks like when no one else is watching." The fire cracked between them. "Real power doesn't take," he said. "It shields." Those last words settled deep into the space between her ribs. Elena looked at him fully now, no fear in her eyes, only a quiet intensity that matched his. The man across from her had killed, commanded, built an empire. But the man who had just spoken wasn't any of those things. He was a boy who had once watched his mother teach a lesson no bullet ever could. "She would have liked you," Lorenzo said. "She sounds like someone I needed back then," Elena replied. "Maybe now too." Her voice didn't crack like it used to. It landed steady, strong, hers. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, but she didn't. His fingers brushed hers, warm and rough and certain. "You asked why you," he said, voice low. "Because when I found you, I saw someone who had every right to give up, but didn't." He leaned in closer. "And because protecting you didn't feel like a duty. It felt like remembering who I was supposed to be." Elena's throat tightened. The space between them shrank, not rushed, not desperate, just inevitable. Her hand moved his cheek, thumb brushing over the faint stubble there. He didn't move, didn't breathe, not until she did. Their foreheads touched first. And then they kissed. Not for comfort. Not because they were broken. But because, for once, they were something whole together. And the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was sacred. When they pulled apart, Elena's eyes shimmered in the firelight. "You saved me," she whispered. Lorenzo shook his head slowly, resting his forehead against hers again. "No," he murmured. "You reminded me why I became the man I am." She didn't argue. She didn't have to. Outside, the wind curled through the stone corridors of the estate, brushing against the windows like a lullaby. Inside, time held still. They sat there, quiet, until the fire had burned low and the night had deepened into velvet. Lorenzo stood first, extending a hand to help her up, not because she couldn't, but because he wanted to. She took it. And he didn't let go. At her door, he paused. His thumb ran along the edge of her hand, and when he spoke, it was quiet but sure. "Stay," he said. "Not as a guest. Not as a patient." He looked her in the eyes. "Stay as my partner. Do you believe that some people come into our lives not to save us, but to remind us who we were always meant to be?" Let us know in the comments, and if Elena and Lorenzo's journey has moved you, subscribe now to see what happens next. Some bonds aren't built in safety. They're forged in fire, and this one is only beginning. The room was older than it looked, and colder than it should have been. High stone walls wrapped around a long walnut table polished to a mirror sheen, surrounded by men with names that carried weight in back alleys and ballot boxes alike. This was the Ricci family council, the inner circle of Don Lorenzo's world. Elena stood just behind him, one hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, the other curled into her palm. Every eye in the room was on her. She wasn't what they expected. She wasn't thin, wasn't demure, wasn't silent. She wore a navy dress that clung to her softly, unapologetically, and her presence was neither loud nor meek. It was there, solid and undeniable. Lorenzo had asked her to be here. She had said yes, knowing full well what it meant to walk into a room like this. Some nodded at her with polite deference, a nod out of respect for the Don more than for her. Others were less subtle. One man whispered to the one beside him, not bothering to lower his voice, "She's not exactly the image of the Donna we imagined." Another chuckled. A third leaned back, steepling his fingers. It was the kind of silence where every breath had an opinion. Lorenzo said nothing at first. He simply sat, eyes scanning the room like a man weighing the value of loyalty against tradition. Elena remained standing. She wouldn't sit at his side until she earned it. And if that meant speaking, she would. An older man at the far end cleared his throat. "Don Ricci," he said, his voice lined with age and entitlement. "You've brought many people through these halls. Soldiers, lieutenants, even outsiders with skills. But this," he gestured toward Elena like she were furniture. "This is who you now bring to your table?" The insult wasn't sharp, it was smug, dipped in condescension. Elena didn't flinch. Lorenzo turned slightly, his expression unreadable. But he didn't stop her. And that alone gave her more power than any title. She stepped forward. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried like thunder rolling beneath the floor. "I know what I look like," she said. "I know what I'm not." A murmur rippled through the room, surprise, discomfort. She didn't pause. "I'm not the woman you imagined," she continued. "Not thin, not quiet, not born into power." Her gaze swept the table. "But here I stand in a room meant to exclude me because your Don asked me to. And because I've earned it." She heard someone scoff. She kept going. "I survived men like the ones who pretend to serve you but poison you from within," she said. "I bled in the back of your warehouse while half this table was blind to what was happening in your own territory." Her voice tightened. "I am not your ideal. I'm your future. And if you can't see that, step aside." Silence. One man opened his mouth, but Lorenzo stood before he could speak. He didn't say a word at first, only moved to Elena's side, took her hand, and brought it to his lips. The gesture was gentle, decisive, final. "She speaks for me," he said. "Not a request. Not a defense. A declaration." The room shifted. A few men nodded slowly. Others looked at each other, reconsidering. Power didn't always come from muscle or violence. Sometimes it came from who the Don chose to trust. Elena sat beside Lorenzo then. Not because she'd been invited, but because she belonged. He placed his hand on the table, fingers brushing hers beneath the polished surface. "Before we move to business," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight, "I have one more announcement." He looked at Elena, and for the first time since she walked into the room, her heart faltered, not from fear, but from something deeper. Effective immediately, he said, Elena will oversee a new initiative, a charity branch in my sister Sophia's name. A beat of silence followed. It will focus on protecting and rehabilitating women like the one my mother once saved, and like the one who now sits beside me. Some of the men straightened. A few looked down. Only the oldest among them gave a slow, respectful nod. Lorenzo's voice didn't rise, but it filled every corner of the room. This is not a favor. It's not a handout. It's her idea. And it's part of who we are now. Elena took a breath that felt deeper than anything she'd known in years. This wasn't just acceptance. It was authority. The cane clicked softly against the stone floor, a steady rhythm beneath Elena's heels. She walked taller now, not fast, not flawless, but with purpose in every step. Her shoulders no longer curled inward. Her chin didn't dip at the sound of whispers. And the pain that once dictated her movements had quieted into something manageable, something conquered. Months had passed since the family council, since the speech, since the hand kiss, since Lorenzo placed power in her hands not as a gesture, but as a vow. The estate had changed with her, and so had Naples. The charity foundation had launched within 6 weeks. Elena had met with city officials, arranged logistics, partnered with shelters, even commissioned murals for women who'd escaped violence and needed more than just roofs. They needed identity. The Ricci name funded it, but it was her voice they followed. Her photos appeared in papers now, side by side with Lorenzo's. Not once was the word charity case used again. The event tonight was hosted at the Coastal Museum, glass walls glowing under warm lights, the Tyrrhenian Sea stretched inky and infinite behind the stage. Lorenzo arrived first, flanked by 2 men but dressed more simply than usual, charcoal suit, no tie, hands loose at his sides. But when Elena entered moments later, the room shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. And she didn't flinch. Her dress was emerald green and soft, fitted to her body the way she had once been told clothes weren't allowed to be. Her cane shimmered black and silver beneath the light, and every step she took felt like an act of defiance turned to elegance. There was no doubt now. She didn't just belong. She owned the space. Lorenzo met her at the bottom of the stairs leading to the main platform. He didn't extend his hand like a gentleman. He didn't offer his arm like a protector. He simply looked at her and said, for the crowd and for himself, "This is Elena. She belongs here." The applause was immediate but not forced. It wasn't polite clapping. It was earned. And Elena, breathing slow, nodded once before stepping to the mic. Her voice carried clearly, rich with conviction. "I'm not here because I asked permission. I'm here because I decided to stay standing. The women we help don't want pity. They want power. And we're going to help them find it." She spoke about rebuilding the Port District, about creating pathways for women to re-enter the workforce, not from desperation, but with dignity. She told stories, hers and others. One girl had been trafficked. Another had fled her husband with nothing but a chipped wedding ring and a duffel bag of library books. Elena didn't flinch when the room got quiet. She let the silence stretch, let it feel. And then she said, with a voice that never wavered, "This isn't about charity. It's about memory. It's about who we once were and what we choose to become." She stepped back, nodded, and walked away with the room rising to its feet. Later that night, the library was quiet again. Firelight danced across the spines of old books, casting gold over velvet chairs and hand-cut rugs. Elena sat cross-legged on the couch, cane resting beside her, barefoot and glowing from within. Lorenzo poured them both wine, then settled into the armchair opposite her. Neither spoke at first. She held a book in her lap, a worn volume of Italian poetry that had once belonged to his mother. She read aloud, soft and slow, her voice dipping like a wave in low tide. When she finished the verse, she looked over the top of the page. Lorenzo was already watching her. "I never thought love would come like this," she whispered. He didn't look away. "Neither did I," he said. "But I would burn the world again to keep it." She smiled, not shy, not surprised, but knowing. Because she believed him. And in the heart of Naples, a mafia king and a woman once left behind built something no one saw coming: a home. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.